All right, thank you all for being here, especially my students who I forced to be here. Thank you. The Women's and Gender Studies and the Center for Sports Communication and Social Impact wants to thank our sponsors, so I'm going to name them all, and forgive me for reading off the list, but there's a lot of them, and it's hard to remember. So the Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication, the Center for Neurodiversity, the Communication Studies Department, the College of Communication and Creative Arts DEI Committee, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Division of DEI, Office of the President, Office of Social Justice, Inclusion, and Conflict Resolution, and the Women's Alliance Network. All right, so thank all of our sponsors, and thank you all for being here, and most importantly, thank you, Carson. It's only her second day off in the entire month, so she's here when she should be off doing other things, so really appreciate Carson being here. So for people who may not be familiar, we're going to forgive them for that, but if they're not familiar with you, could you just kind of start off by giving a little background?
Yeah, I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida. I started playing soccer when I was 5. I played a lot of sports growing up, but soccer was the one that stuck the most. I think having one arm, tennis and all that was fun, but probably not for me. So I stuck with soccer, and I've been playing a long time now. I am 30, so this is my 8th or 9th year. Other people probably know better, in the league, in the NWSL. I played at Florida State University, so played there for 4 years. Got drafted 4th overall to Seattle Reign. So I went to Seattle, played 2 years there, got traded to Orlando, played there for 3, then North Carolina Courage for 2, and now it's my 2nd year at Racing Louisville. So it's been quite the journey, a lot of different cities, a lot of different places, but it's been incredible so far.
So you mentioned that, tennis might not have been for you, but so like when you were younger and you were kind of growing up, what type of, and this could be inside or outside of sports, however you want to take it, what type of representation or visibility did you see as it relates to disability?
Not much. To be honest, growing up with just specifically talking about soccer, we didn't have women's sports really on TV in general. I couldn't find anything to do with women's sports on TV when I was growing up. The only thing I could find really was the big tournaments like the Olympics or World Cups and things like that. But those are the only times I could watch women play sports in general, not just soccer. So to already not get to see a lot of women on TV was challenging growing up, and then definitely didn't see many people with disabilities and things like that. It just was never in the news, never in the media, and I think it's definitely changed over time, which is obviously nice. It's growing. People are understanding more about disabilities, and especially in sports. But yeah, I just had nothing to watch growing up. I had no one to look up to, and I think that's made a big difference in how I am today towards younger kids and kids with disabilities, is because I just didn't have those people to look up to.
I mean, you mentioned the big tournaments. You were 6 in the 1999 World Cup. And they weren't a very diverse team. I mean, a couple here and there, and that just kind of gets me thinking, if that is the most diversity you were seeing, kind of think about what that says to a 6-year-old.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of had no hope in that sense, because I didn't know if I could even play soccer at 6, and definitely didn't know if I could ever play it professionally. So it was definitely challenging growing up, just again to see women in general. But yeah, I remember that World Cup specifically. I mean, I would wake up with my dad, and we'd eat ice cream and watch, and that was like, those are the best memories when I was able to see women play soccer and on a world stage like that.
One of the things about soccer is that in the U.S. at least, especially the way the American system works, it's very inaccessible for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different types of people. And it's been something that I think has been coming to the forefront more recently. But I'm sure you must have experienced a lot of that growing up, just all the inaccessibility in a variety of spaces and ways.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was actually my coach growing up, and we did all the things. We did club soccer, we did ODP, we did all the developmental programs, and I feel very fortunate to be able to have parents that were able to afford things like that, because there's a lot of people out there that were incredible soccer players and they just never had the opportunity because they didn't have the money. And I will say now, he was a club coach for a really long time, and he's actually gotten out of club for that specific reason, because he saw kids that were incredible, that one year they'd be there scoring 1,000 goals, and the next year their parents couldn't afford soccer and they weren't able to play. So I do think that soccer is getting a little bit expensive for younger kids and the younger generation. And I think that that is definitely something that we need to work on and be better at, in sports, because anyone should be allowed to do something they love and play what they love, but not being able to specifically because of money is it's sad. It's sad to someone like me that got that opportunity.
When we talk about inaccessibility, obviously part of that is disability. And I think part of it, the way at least I see it, and you can totally tell me if I'm wrong, or if you view it differently, but it seems like so much content about disability or limb difference is for non-disabled people to kind of like make it seem more palatable. And I find that frustrating, but I'm just, do you think maybe that, I guess, how much do you think that impacted you? I mean, whether you were younger or even high school or even now, right? I mean, I imagine that that's something that has kind of followed you with you.
Yeah, I think, even seeing like commercials and stuff like that with like disabilities, it doesn't feel very authentic to me. And I think that that's what's challenging. I think sometimes they're getting people in all walks of life, which is great. I think that part of it is really diverse, but I think that, like you said, they're showing things that are trying to explain and to get people to understand what it feels like to be disabled or to have a disability. And I think that it needs to be much more authentic, especially in sports. And I think that it's challenging, though. I will say it's challenging because there isn't many people that they can use to kind of get the message out. And so I think that that's why I take a lot of responsibility in doing the best that I can to be as authentic as possible, because I think sometimes it's for a lot of show and more educational rather than just authentic and just having conversations about certain things and about people that do have disabilities in sports.
And that is what feels so different about the content around you, is it does feel really authentic, and it does actually feel like it is for disabled people, which seems so like it shouldn't be the case that that's only one example, but really you feel like almost it's a singular kind of example. And I know that you've spoken about how you kind of came late to this role of advocacy, and is that part of it the reason?
Yeah, when I saw commercials and things like that, or when people talk about disability in sports, it just, honestly, because it was so inauthentic, I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to be associated with it because it just wasn't something that felt authentic. It almost pushed me away from telling my story because I didn't want to come off as like just trying to tell everyone who I am and show people what I can do. I actually just wanted to be the person that shows people with disabilities what they can do, rather than show people without disabilities what I can do. And so I think that kind of drove me away to begin with. And I just didn't want to be a part of it. And then I came around, thank goodness, thanks to my mom. But just a quick story about that. In college, I was a freshman and we went to the College Cup, so the national championship. And I was getting interviewed with all of my senior incredible teammates. And I was a freshman, and I'm like, there's no reason I should be in the same room as all of them. I'm just not as good as them. And these girls were going to play professionally in the next year. And so when we got to the interview room, all their questions were about the national championship and about their journey as a soccer player, and all mine were about my arm. And I just was so frustrated about that because I just wanted to be known as a good soccer player. I didn't want to be known as the soccer player that's missing an arm. So I called my mom after. I was really frustrated, and she was like, well, this is the time that you can flip your script, and either you can use it and be upset about it and pout about it, or you can use it as an opportunity to actually tell your story the way you want to, not how other people use you to tell a story.
Yeah, and all the time, the word that I keep coming back to is inspiration. Everyone always says, oh, you're inspiring, you're inspiration. And just feels so condescending. And I'm curious how much of a role that played in you kind of putting yourself at an arm's distance, from that advocacy role, because that to only be talked about as an inspiration, as inspiring, as opposed to a soccer player or just a person, must feel a little dehumanizing.
Yeah, there are so many times when someone would DM me or come up to me and tell me how much of an inspiration I am, and it took everything in me not to be like, why am I an inspiration? Actually just tell me why. Is it because of my arm, or is it because of my abilities on the soccer field? So obviously I would never treat someone that way, but so many times I just was like, why do you think I'm an inspiration? And if it was always to do with my arm, I just think I would have been so frustrated, especially early in my journey, because I wasn't there yet, and I had to come. My parents told me so many times, when I was younger, you know, you're different. You can tell your story however you want, but they never pushed me to tell my story. And actually only recently I've put on my Instagram. I never hid my arm on Instagram, but I never like openly talked about it. So 2 years ago now, I think I asked my roommate to just take a picture of me. And I actually talked about my arm on Instagram for the first time, and I was 28 years old. Yeah. So I remember my mom saying, we wanted you to do that for so long, but that's not our story to tell. And so I think also when you're kind of telling a story about yourself, you have to come to terms with it on your own time. Yeah. And I felt like I finally did that and was able to really talk about it, especially on social media.
I mean, now you're in EA Sports FC. You do have this platform. And you worked with Nike to create cleats. And I read a quote that you said and used the word relief. Yeah. And that really hit me, because I feel like a lot of people who are marginalized or underrepresented, they always talk about something that happened to them later, and they think about the past version of themselves when they were younger, and they use the word relief. I would just love to hear your perspective on that, using that word and what that was like to be able to create those cleats.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who plays sports or anyone in general, if you think about when you're 6 years old and you're either playing basketball or you're playing soccer, and you have to, in the middle of the game, while you're trying to defend the opponents, use one arm to tie your shoe. Like, even if you have two arms, like trying to use one arm to tie your shoe in the middle of a very high stress game, even at 6 years old. But I never even had that until recently. So I've gone from 6, where it isn't that serious, to run over to your parents and get them to tie your shoe quickly, to not being able to in the pros when it is your job to make sure that they don't score a goal and things like that. Like, it is serious, and it is my job, as crazy as it sounds, but it is my job to be the best version of myself every single day. And if I'm not able to quickly tie my shoe because I don't have the right gear to help me do that as a professional, it's a big difference, and it actually can change a game. And then I feel like now that game's in my hands, because if I'm tying my shoe while they're attacking, they could score a goal, we could lose, we could not make playoffs. So as not serious as it sounds, it is a relief to be able to have a shoe that I can literally just pull in about 2 seconds and be back in the game. So I think when you think of it that way, when you're in that situation, you're not able to tie your shoe because you have one arm. It was challenging growing up, and it's something that that's what I like about Nike though. They're the best company I've ever worked with, and it's not just because all their gear is amazing and cool and we love their dunks and things like that, but I think because I never even thought of a shoe that didn't have shoelaces, yet all of those people that work at Nike who have two hands thought about it before me, who has one hand. So I think that they are really good about just trying to become better and better and better, and they're versatile in the way that they think, and I really appreciate that from them.
So part of this idea of, looking at people with limb difference or disability as kind of inspiration and not as humans, means that we don't actually get to often see them in public relationships, because they're only this one thing, they're only in this one box, right? But that's not the case with you. And so I was just curious how you feel like you navigate, being someone who's in the limb difference community, but also being a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, and being in a public relationship, and how you navigate that, how you manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously as society we have grown a lot, not just in sports, but in general. Obviously we have ways to go. But I will say, I think it's all about the people that came before me. I just think that it's just, you're able to tell your story more because you feel more comfortable, because you've seen people, like we talked about earlier, when you see people that are similar to you in the media and things like that, and not getting criticized for being themselves. I think it just shows that you can be authentic to who you are, no matter what you stand for and things like that. So kind of goes back to paving the way, and that it's not always just about you, but it's about the next generations as well. And I do think there was a lot of people that came before me in the public, really, the Megan Rapinos, people like that, who've paved the way for a lot of different reasons. And I think that you have so many amazing players that came through that stand for a lot of different things. And if you fit in those categories, I feel like you can actually authentically be yourself because of those people.
Yeah, I mean, the league started in 2012, you were drafted in 2016. It does feel like it is a completely different soccer world league itself when it comes to queer representation. Do you feel like you've seen that firsthand?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot has changed, and I think it's all been for the better. I think that early on, coming into the league as a rookie, one, you probably don't even know who you are when you're just trying to fit in. And like, I went to Florida State and then I got drafted to Seattle. Those places are very different. And so I think that going across the country to a very different type of society and environment was scary and challenging. And I think as a rookie, you kind of are just trying to figure out who you are. But I think that throughout my time in the league, it definitely has changed. I think a lot of the markets are in better places for that, and they're just more accepting of who everyone is and what they stand for. And I just appreciate the NWSL for that too, because I do think they're trying their best to get markets that are much more, are evolving over time, and they're not stuck in the old ways, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just look at the 4 NWSL clubs that you played for, Seattle, Orlando, North Carolina, Louisville, 4 very different experiences when it comes to all different types of identities and inclusion. And, you know, when you get traded, you don't have a say in that.
No.
What type of a toll, if any, does that take?
Yeah, I mean, getting traded, not knowing, I think over time it's gotten better. So we have a CBA now, which obviously gives us more rights as players in the league. There was times before that we would wake up, go to training early in my years, so like Seattle days, so about 8 years ago, where you could go to training, be on a team for a couple months, and then wake up. You could be a good player on that team, a starter, and all of a sudden you come in to work in Seattle and you're traded to Orlando the next day in the middle of the season, and you just had no right. You had to go.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, then you weren't going to play professional sports. So I think a lot has changed. We do have more rights now because of our CBA. So you still don't have a say where you go, but if you are unhappy, they do try and help you out. They do try and ask at least your opinion about clubs that you definitely do or don't want to go to, whereas before you would just get traded and you had no other option. And that was the life. And I remember a lot of my friends in the league, you know, they would be my teammates and best friends one day, and then I would be playing against them a week later. And that happened in North Carolina. 3 of our girls got traded to Kansas City, and then we played Kansas City the next week, and we played against them.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the season. So you could have teammates one day and enemies the next, and it could have happened in a matter of a week. So I think that there's been a lot of change. But even when I got traded from North Carolina to Louisville 2 years ago, just bought a house and was settled in North Carolina and had to report to Louisville in 1 week. We were late to training, late to preseason in Louisville, and that was it's just the job. So it's unfortunate sometimes. You don't really have a say, but I will say that at least NWSL is getting better about having markets where people do actually want to go play instead of being like, I absolutely do not want to go there, because there's not a team in the league where I would say that, which is nice.
You talk about moving around all these different places, and you've said that at every point in your life, you feel like you had to come out as, you know, having a limb difference, and you had to kind of tell your story all over again. So it was like everybody knew in your school, like when you were in high school, because it was a small school, then you had to do it all over again when you were at Florida State. And then it was after Florida State, it's like, okay, now I got drafted to Seattle, and kind of so on and so forth. It's just like this continued telling your story over and over again. And honestly, when I was like reading and listening to some of your quotes about it, it really made me think about, oh, like she's talking about coming out, but you were talking about your arm and disability and limb difference. I was just really struck by the parallels there. And have you like thought about it in those contexts, or how do you, I guess, think about that now?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's exhausting to have to tell your story and who you are every single place you go, but I think that's just growing the game, though, in the NWSL. So now I feel like no matter where I go, because the media is so much better in the NWSL, and we're getting on TV, so people actually know that there's a professional team in a professional league. And most of the time, when I would get traded early in the years, people wouldn't even know what team I'm going to, because they've never even heard that we had a professional women's soccer league in America. So I will say the difference between early on in my career and now is that the game has grown so much that I think at least most people know that there is some kind of league. They may not know the teams, they may not know the players, but they do know that there is a professional women's soccer league. So we're getting way more fans. The media is always at training, always at games. So I think that it is getting out there a bit more. So I don't feel like I have to tell my story anymore because of that reason. And I do appreciate the NWSL and the way that we have grown over time, where people are more aware of the players that are on the teams that are closest to them. So it's nice to have that kind of relief to not have to go tell my story every single place I go, because people finally know who we are.
Yeah. I do want to focus a little bit on mental health, because I think that it's not talked about as much, I mean, generally, but also specifically within the context of women's sports and women's soccer. And I think it's really important in women's soccer because it's a little bit different soccer, the way soccer works in America, in that you play for your club, you play for your country. You know, when you're in high school, when you're in college, you're playing on the ODP, or you're trying out for the youth national teams, and there's just so many teams that you're trying to play for. It seems exhausting. And I'm just wondering, you played for the U17 national team, U23 national team. Are you equipped, like at 17, 18, 19 years old, to be going from club and country or high school? And, it just feels like such a big ask for teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you asked that, because I did just have this conversation with my agent the other day. Early on, I mean, no teenager is equipped for something like that. I mean, when you're in high school, you're just trying to figure out, like, what you're going to do on Friday night. Like, you're not trying to make 3 different teams, trying to be the best at your sport, still trying to make sure your academics are up, because now you have to go to college. And if you are failing on your academics, you can't go play soccer in college, then you can't graduate, you can't go to the pros. Back in the day, it was obviously much different than now. We did have to get more of an education. Now I feel like you can kind of go to the pros and you can skip college and you can always come back and do your academics and things like that. But that just wasn't how it was back when I was growing up. Right. So, I mean, yeah, no teenager is prepared for that. I felt like I definitely was pulled from a lot of different directions. And that was quite challenging. But I will say it's actually more challenging now that I'm older. Because when you're 17, 20, it's awesome to make a national team. It's cool, but it's almost just, to be honest, if you're good, it's kind of expected. Whereas now when you're older, you're fighting to make a national team for the United States. And like, that's everyone's goal. If you're a professional soccer player, is you want to make the women's national team. So now that I'm older, I do feel like there's a lot more pressure, because that is just like the ultimate goal. Whereas when you're younger, you still have so much to look forward to in life that it's cool to go to the 17s and the 20s, but you're really looking for the future with the national team, the full side. So it's not as challenging then. Now that you're older, it's like this is kind of your last ditch effort to make that dream come true. And I think that that's quite challenging. And that's what my agent was talking to me about the other day. She was like, I do wish that my players, and she has a bunch of people in the league, she's like, I wish that you guys could understand that you're like a 1%. Like, not many people are making it into professional soccer. She was like, but you guys are so worried about making the national team that you forget that you are literally 1% of the people that can even make it to be a professional athlete. And she goes, I wish you guys could understand how incredible you are at the club level, because not many people are professional athletes. And she was like, when you got drafted, that's all that you wanted to do was be a professional soccer player. And she's like, now you're trying to be a professional soccer player, which was your dream at one point, but also have this other dream of making the national team. And she was like, I just wish my players could understand how incredible they are without always striving to make a national team to feel like they're good enough.
Yeah. I mean, part of that, I feel like there's always, with women's soccer and men's soccer too, right? Soccer, there's always another tournament. Yeah. Even these smaller tournaments. I mean, I think so many people, you think about the World Cup and you think about the Olympics, and they're the big ones, and they're the flashy ones. They're the ones that everybody, watches and pays attention to. But, there's like the Gold Cup, and it's like, CONCACAF, and going to Portugal. And there's all these different smaller tournaments that I feel like people don't realize that if you're a professional soccer player, you are constantly working to make that roster. Yeah. And sometimes that roster's 23, and sometimes that roster's 30. And sometimes they'll release, well, these are the 50 people that are eligible for this roster, and your name's on that list, but then it's not on the other list. And that must just take so much mental fortitude. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Every time there's a camp, I get an email that you're on the provisional roster, which means you have a chance to be selected. And every time I get it, it's from the same person, our GM from the national team. So you just get, every single time you just get so excited that you're getting an email, and then you're like, okay, well, if someone gets hurt, now you're in. So you're not actually invited to camp, but if someone got hurt, then you can come to camp. And then the next camp, it's the same thing. You get an email from the same lady. You're hoping that you're getting invited to camp, but you're not. And if someone gets injured, it's just the same thing over and over and over again until you are lucky enough to make a roster. which I was 2 years ago. Or last year, I was able to make a roster, and it's the same email though. It's crazy to have the same email from the same person, but never know if you're actually going to camp or you're just on the roster in case someone gets hurt. So yeah, it's really hard because every single time there's camp, some of us who are on that professional roster get the same email as people that are going to camp. It's just that you're not actually going to camp. But if someone gets injured, then you'll come. Right. So it's hard. I mean, it's hard to open that email and see the difference between attending camp and just being on the roster to be selected. So while you're still working on club and still trying to make sure that you're fully there, you're fully immersed in your club environment, because that also is so important to have that kind of that's our job. The professional sports, the NWSL is our job. Mm-hmm. The national team is just an added bonus. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's hard to remember that you do have a job that you have to take care of, and that's in the NWSL. And if you're lucky enough to go to the national team, that's great. But you're employed by the NWSL, so you have to be mentally and physically there every single day.
I just want to stick with this for a second, because what you're saying is that you kind of have to hope someone gets hurt. And what a space to be in, right? Because we're talking about people who you're friends with. We're talking about people who you've played on teams with. We're talking about people you know. Mm-hmm. And the hope is, oh, well, if somebody but you don't want it to be bad, right? So it's like the mental gymnastics that you must go through. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I did go to Spain last year because Emily Fox got hurt. They were playing in England. She got hurt in that game, got a concussion. So I was called in to travel to Spain 2 days before playing the Spanish national team. And the only reason I went to that camp was because she got injured. I didn't want her to get injured. To be honest, I was sitting eating frozen yogurt when Vlatko called. He called at halftime of their game in England. She got hurt in the first half. I was sitting eating frozen yogurt, and he was like, you need to get on a flight tomorrow to meet us in Spain. You're going to be playing against Spain in 2 days. Yeah. So just like the whirlwind of emotions. Like I was sitting there watching them play England, and then I get a call at halftime from him saying, you're going to be on a flight tomorrow to come play for the United States women's national team. I hope you're ready. Like, right. It's a lot, but it's an honor. And that's what matters the most, is that you have to take it like that. It is a job, but it is an absolute honor to play for the national team, to represent your country. And I think sometimes we do forget that. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we get caught up with who gets to make camp, who gets to go, who's not even on the roster, and there's a lot of comparisons. But when you are on the roster, it's just such an honor. And I think sometimes we, including myself, need to realize that at one point I was just hoping to get one cap with the national team. Then I got one cap, and I'm like, well, I want another one. And my mom's like, but remember when your dream was just to get one cap. Yeah. So it's hard to remember that sometimes, but it is truly an honor to play for the national team. And I think sometimes we take it for granted. And that's something now, not being called in, I'll never take for granted if I do get called in again. So, but it is hard. I mean, I know a lot of girls, when Mallory Swanson got hurt, I wasn't in that position. I'm not a forward, but I know a lot of the girls were like, is my name next? Am I getting called next? So it's unfortunate. Injuries are unfortunate. They are part of the game. But yeah, you never hope that someone gets injured just because you get a chance.
Well, and meanwhile, you have to stay focused on your club, which is different personnel, a different coach, sometimes a different style of soccer. Mm-hmm. You might be playing a different position. Mm-hmm. I mean, that isn't necessarily the case with you, but I mean, a lot of people, they kind of go back and forth between different roster spots. And I think that because the national team gets so much attention, media attention, both mainstream and not, I think we forget, or we don't think enough about these little intricacies. Yeah. And kind of all the things that go into that. How hard is it to stay focused on, the national team when you get called into camp, and then Louisville when you're with Louisville?
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, when I got called in the first time, I was with North Carolina, and I remember every time the national team, for those that don't know, every time we play for the national team, the NWSL takes a break. So you're not missing games, but you are missing trainings with your team. And so I got called in. I went to camp. I missed a lot of trainings with my team. And then I met them, my North Carolina team, in Seattle the day before the game. And I'm starting for North Carolina. And it is hard because you have someone that's also, it's hard for me traveling back and forth playing on two different teams, but it's also hard for the person that has now played my position in North Carolina while I was gone. And now they're just on the bench because I'm back. And so I think that it's hard for a lot of people. And I think that we forget that there's a lot of people on the team. And it doesn't just affect you when you get called in. So Savannah DeMello, who's on my team, she's getting called to the national team. She's gone right now. So there's a girl playing in her position. She's doing great, but it probably doesn't really matter because she's going to come back and that she's going to play. Yeah. So it doesn't just affect the people that are on the national team, traveling back and forth, being on different teams. It affects the people on, your club team that are playing in your position, but might not actually get that chance when you're back. So I think that that's another side of it that is sometimes a little awkward and it's a little hard. And I think that, but it's just a job. You have to know that, sometimes you're not going to be in all the trainings, but you're going to come back and you have to have your mind fully there for the game, even if you flew in the day before, which is what happened when I went to Seattle. I mean, I just switched. I got called in as my first cap of the national team. I'm like on cloud 9. Yeah. I'm so excited, only talking about the national team. And then a day later, I'm having to go play with my NWSL team and fight for a spot in playoffs. So I think it is hard sometimes mentally. But again, like I said, I'm playing professional soccer for a job. And I think that that's something that I just have to love. And I love the journey. And you just have to remember sometimes that it is an honor to be able to even play professional soccer.
I do want us to talk a little bit more in detail about mental health as it relates to women's sports specifically, because it is unique in that you're getting a different type of, vitriol. You're getting people saying, well, you don't deserve equal pay, or, you don't deserve, a better contract, or you don't deserve better facilities, or, the list kind of goes on and on and on. And you're also being told, hey, if you fail, then women's soccer's done. And that the history of women's soccer professionally in the U.S., we've seen this over and over again. And a lot of the times, certain teams or players haven't spoken up because they've been told, hey, if you fail, women's soccer fails. Yeah. Which we just don't see or hear in men's sports ever. And that must also take a toll mentally, be a little exhausting to try to validate your existence in a sport while also trying to be really good at that sport.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for days about this topic. I'll start with a story just the other day. My teammate, who's from New Zealand, she was telling me, like, she doesn't know obviously much about basketball. It's not super big over there. So she was talking about the Steph Curry, and Sabrina shoot off, whatever, NBA shoot off thing they had the other day, whatever. And she was like, oh, they have different size basketballs, and they shoot from different lines. And she just couldn't understand that because she's like, well, we don't play with different size balls in soccer, and the field's the exact same size. Right. And so I think that sometimes, especially in soccer, we forget that we do the exact same thing as men. Our game isn't any shorter. It's 90 minutes. We get the same amount of time, same amount of subs. We're playing with the same ball, same size field. And I think sometimes people forget that. There's so many fans in the MLS, and men's soccer has just been really good for a long time. And we are still coming up in the NWSL, but I think that side of it, kind of the disrespect, I will say, for the difference between men and women's sports is very, very prevalent. And I think that is quite challenging for us because we don't want to compare ourselves to the men. I don't think that's the way to go about it. I don't think that we're going to get more fans or be any better because we're comparing ourselves to the men, saying that we are doing the exact same thing and getting all upset about it. I actually think that we could both work together because there are a lot of men in the MLS that are saying we do deserve more and that you guys are incredible. So I think sometimes we get caught up with trying to compete with men, which I don't think we need to do, because we are just as good as them, and we don't need to tell everyone and try and show everyone that we're just as good as them because they're not competing against us. There's no reason we should have to compete against them in the same sport. So I think that that's been quite challenging. Yes. When I was at Florida State, the NWSL was like a couple years old, and 3 years before I got drafted, it had failed completely, and we didn't even have a league. So when I went to Florida State, my dream was to be a professional athlete, but I didn't even know if there was going to be a league. So for men, they get to go to college knowing that they're going to get drafted because there's always going to be the MLS. Whereas I didn't know if there was going to be the NWSL. I didn't know if my dreams were actually going to be able to even come true because I didn't know if there was going to be a league. So I think that that's something that we've grown a lot over time. The NWSL has become more stable, thank goodness. But there was times where, I had no idea if I was even going to have a job because I had no idea if the NWSL was even gonna be able to survive.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to expectations, because if you look at early days of MLS, it wasn't that successful. It took a long time because it takes a while to grow a sport. It takes a while to grow a league. And I think that people are trying to compare MLS at 25 years versus NWSL at 12. And it's like, well, are you going to compare a 12-year-old to a 25-year-old? That makes no sense. And it just, I don't know, I think to your point about comparisons, right? It's like, well, that's not even a good comparison to make.
No.
But I do think there's always these different set of expectations. And one of them with women's sports is, you have to take every selfie, you have to sign everything, you have to be so nice all the time to everyone because they're going to remember it. And I just, we're not saying that about Patrick Mahomes.
No.
And we're not, Patrick Mahomes doesn't have to take every selfie and sign everything, and we still love him. And it's that incredibly difficult to be on all the time.
Yes. I will say I think that's one of the hardest parts of the job. Like you said, when Patrick Mahomes and them lose a game, they're allowed to go be mad about it. When we lose a game, we have to go sign autographs. And I will say, I do feel a little different than probably a lot of people in the league, because I feel like my stance on it is that these people are supporting us, and they're the reason we have a job. They're supporting us. They have season tickets. They're coming to every game. And they're spending their hard-earned money to come watch us play. And I think that is incredible. Because for a family of 5 coming to an NWSL game, it isn't the cheapest. Yes, it's cheaper than going to a Chiefs game or a Phillies game, whatever. But, it isn't the cheapest for people that have 5 kids or 5 people in their family. So I look at it in a different way, where, as I know some people do, it does get quite difficult for them to feel like they have to stand out there to sign autographs. And if not, if you step one in the wrong direction one way, it will be in the media and things like that. And I do feel like it is a lot more personalized in women's soccer than it is in football, and sports like that. So I tried last year to meet someone with a disability or with missing an arm in every single stadium I played in. I got to about 7, so I didn't find a person with a disability in every single stadium, but that was my goal. And I do specifically remember one time in Kansas City, there was 2 girls that were missing an arm. I had already set up a meeting with them after the game, but we had lost. And it was the last thing I wanted to do. Right. And I think I had someone saying, you need to go meet them, you need to go meet them. And I just remember finally, I feel like I'm a pretty nice person, but finally I was like, I need you to give me a second. We just lost a game that was we were fighting for playoff spot and things like that. And we just lost the game. I need a second before I can go put on a face, to be nice and to be the nice Carson Pickett and, go sign autographs and things like that. Sometimes we just need to be people, and this is our job. And when you fail at your job, you're going to be pissed off. And if you're not, then you probably don't really care that much about it. And so that is quite difficult sometimes. It is challenging to always be on, to always feel like you have to take the pictures. When I was on Orlando, I had Alex Morgan, Marta, Ashlyn, Allie Krieger, all of them on my team. So in airports and stuff, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Not for me at the time, but for them, it was a nightmare. Yeah. You had people stopping them every single step that they took. And so I can imagine that would be quite challenging. So it's kind of yes, I'm excited that women's soccer is it's growing in the U.S. and it's getting more popular, but also there is a side to it where we do need to remember, I think people need to remember that we are still humans and we are still people. And if we're out with our family at a dinner and you just come up and ask for a picture, it's okay. And I'm excited that you know who I am, but also I'm still a person and I'm still out eating dinner with my family, and this is the time just for them. So I think that's hard sometimes.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions about NWSL particularly, because it's been a really, really interesting couple of years. Interesting probably undersells it, but we've got discussions about facilities being up to professional level. I know you haven't had that problem in Louisville. There have been new media rights deal, the CBA that you mentioned, and of course, the sex abuse, emotional abuse, which led to, half a dozen coaches getting fired, a GM, a lot of movement. That, again, on top of all the things we've been talking about, it just feels like a lot. It feels like a lot. And as a player, how do you handle that?
Yeah, that was a difficult time at NWSL. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was horrible. And I remember specifically being on North Carolina. So if anyone knows, that was one of the biggest scandals, being on North Carolina at that time. Lost our coach mid-season, never saw him again because of the things that happened. And I just remember there was a lot that went into that. And it wasn't just about losing your coach and trying to find an interim coach and the things that you have to do anyway. I think for a lot of players, it was like, if you need mental health time, meetings, you can take off of training. So it was a really weird time in the NWSL, and it was a really sad time because you had people who physically couldn't come to training because they were actually off getting mental health, their mental health figured out. And so, sometimes you would have 15 in training, sometimes you would have your whole team, sometimes you'd only have 5 because there's people dealing with things that they dealt with and should have never had to go through, and missing trainings because they were trying to figure out how to deal with what had just happened. So I think that was a really terrible time for the NWSL. I think that, everyone did the best that they could to try and figure out a way through it. But it was really, really hard those times. And I remember, especially in the media, we had a lot of training on things to say. If you didn't feel comfortable, when someone asked me a question, usually in the media, I answer everything. But I mean, our media guy was working overtime being like, if you don't feel comfortable, you can say you don't feel comfortable talking about it because you don't want to say the wrong thing because, again, you will be in the news about it. So it was hard. It was hard to focus on soccer when that was like the main focus of the NWSL was these scandals that had happened and these women that have gotten abused and things like that. It was hard to focus on soccer, and it was sad because that's our job. And people were trying to deal with things in their own personal life, and luckily I was not one of those, but I just have so much empathy for them because I can't imagine trying to be your best self every day, do your job every day, but having to deal with so much that maybe people didn't even know about. So, I think our club at the time, I think there's a lot of clubs that handled it really well. They had a lot of support, and I do appreciate the NWSL and the clubs having those people and those resources for the players that needed it.
You've seen a lot in your time in the league. I mean, 4 different teams. You had 2 overseas loans. Drafted 4th overall, traded. I mean, a lot. What do you think that has all taught you?
I think the biggest thing, honestly, I'll start with a positive, is just like seeing a lot of different places and meeting a lot of different people. I had a lot of different experiences. So every single club that I've been at, although it's been in the same league, every single club has been very different. Whether that's the environment, whether that's the people, whether that's my living situation. So for those that don't know, when I got drafted, it was a 6-month season, and my first contract was $7,000. So you just can't live off of it. Luckily, I had parents who supported me and helped me through that because there's a lot of players that literally couldn't make it because they didn't have that support. And so now the minimum, I think, I don't know what it is now, but it is much higher. And people are making a lot more money, and they're actually able to be professional athletes and not have to go get a second job. I mean, in Seattle, we probably had 10 girls that had other jobs, whether it was coaching, whether it was being at a coffee shop working, whether it was at, a clothes store. I mean, we had like 10 to 12 girls that had 2 different jobs while still playing professional soccer. And they were meant to be at our trainings every single day, fully there without worrying about, their job that they were rushing to 10 minutes after training. So we've come a long way. People don't have to have 2 jobs now, which sounds silly, but it is like so exciting for the league to not have 2 jobs, to finally fully be able to focus on your one job, and that's being a professional athlete. So I've met a lot of people along the way. I've been to a lot of different places. I've had great experiences. I've had not great experiences. I went to Cyprus as one of my loans. All my experiences, thank goodness, in NWSL have been amazing. So I have nothing but great things to say about NWSL with the places that I've been. But in Cyprus, we went over there for a couple months, me and a couple teammates, and we wanted to leave. It wasn't a good environment, and we literally, because life is just much different in different countries, you don't know what to expect. It's not like America. We had to go talk to the president of the club, who was this high-end guy in the government in Cyprus, and the way that he treated women was just unacceptable, to be honest. And when me and my teammate walked in, we were just trying to leave the country because it was not a good environment. It was a really bad situation. And he just was like, can you go close my window? I'm getting hot. Like, he would just treat us like we were, like, not working for him. Like we weren't professional athletes. And the way that he spoke to us was just so unacceptable. And it was just a really bad situation. So I've, been able to make a living off of professional soccer, and I'm so grateful for that. But I've definitely been in places where, honestly, I just wanted to leave the country and didn't know if I was going to be able to. So I've learned a lot. I've traveled a lot. But I will say, for the most part, it's been the best experience of my life. I've gotten a lot of opportunities, and I do feel very, very lucky and honored and blessed to be able to have all the experiences that I've had.
We started the conversation talking about, diversity, lack of diversity. And I think it's really important to point out that is really changing. Your Louisville team, you had 6 different continents. 6 different continents were represented on your team last year on the roster. And I think about, you saying you're 6 years old watching the Women's World Cup in '99 and, the early iterations of the league, WUSA, WPS, the diversity just wasn't there. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Is this the direction that you feel like the league is headed? It feels so much more diverse now in all areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that NWSL has done a great job, not just from getting people from other countries, but just getting a lot of different types of Americans as well. It's not standard to see a certain type of American playing in the league now. I mean, we have so many different kind of people, which I think is so incredible for the league. It's just, you can have so many different kind of teammates on one team and be from all walks of life and all come together and get to compete for the same goal every single day and every single year. And I think that that's what's really cool about professional sports, especially women's soccer, is just being able to have so many teammates from so many different areas, so many different countries, and a lot of different stories. You learn a lot about people, and I think that that's been the best part about my journey so far. Is just, if I do want to go to Japan, I've had a Japanese teammate and I have someone to stay with. If I want to go to Finland, I now have a girl that's from Finland and I get to stay with. So I think that it's cool to kind of open up, the way that you think about life, and it's not just about you, and it's not stock standard kind of people in the NWSL. I mean, we have people from, again, all walks of life, and I think that that's been the coolest part, is just seeing how diverse the NWSL is becoming.
So I have one more question, and then I'm going to let you all ask some questions. And it's just about the evolution of women's sports, women's soccer, because as I said earlier, NWSL, I mean, you get drafted in 2016. It feels like such a different league. And I know we were kind of joking on the way over here about Sky Blue. But there's so many differences. And what do you feel as someone who's been in it in so many different spaces and different teams with different experiences? What do you feel have you seen the evolution of women's soccer in America?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing that I can say is that I actually feel like I'm a professional athlete. Again, making $7,000 my first year kind of just felt like a joke a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it seemed like you were back in club soccer and you're just playing on a random team, just trying to make it. And when you said back in the day, if you said I'm a professional soccer player, people were like, okay, like, for who? Like, because the NWSL wasn't that big. And again, it failed so many times before that nobody knew if there was even going to be a league the next year. So I think just the professionalism over time has grown, and you actually feel like you have a job, and it is a serious job. And yes, it's for sports and in sports, but you still are getting paid a decent amount where it makes it kind of valid, which it should never feel that way. But getting paid what you deserve to be paid and what all these girls have fought for so many years just makes it seem valid and makes it seem like you actually have a real job, where back in the day it just didn't feel like that. Kind of just felt like you were doing something literally for the love of the game. I mean, I was making $7,000, so I was definitely doing it for the love of the game. It wasn't for the money. So I think just the professionalism over time has grown so much.
All right, so I want to open it up to questions. I did want to give the WIT. I don't know who's here for the WIT, so I'm sorry. But whoever is here for the WIT, I wanted to give them an opportunity to ask a question first.
Hi, my name is Brajan.
Hi.
I just want to ask a question on just your most proudful moment being part of the Women's League.
I think I'm most proud about our CBA. Again, it kind of gave us just rights, basic rights that we didn't have in the NWSL. The minimum has gone up because of our CBA. Our living conditions have gone up because of our CBA. People don't have to live in host families anymore. I mean, my first 2 years in Seattle, I lived with a family, and I'm an only child. and I'm not spoiled by any means, but like when you go from being an only child to literally sharing a bathroom with a 7-year-old because that's your only living condition, if you want to play professional sports, I mean, it's a big difference. You know, I live by myself in college, so I went from living by myself in college to literally living with 3 kids under 15 years old and sharing a bathroom with a 7-year-old. So you just kind of feel like it's a little bit, like I said, it just doesn't feel like a serious job at that time. So I think the CBA has now made sure that we all have apartments. You're not living with more than one other person, which I think is a big difference. Back in the day, we had to, on away trips, we were in a hotel room with 4 people, and now we only have 1 roommate. So we're in a hotel with 2 people. So I think little things like that you don't think are that big of a deal have definitely changed. And I think it was because of the CBA, and I definitely am very proud about that. It's a great question.
Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, so you two in Florida State. How was it managing schoolwork and being a professional athlete?
Yeah, so it was hard. But I will say, luckily at Florida State, we did have a lot of resources. So because at Florida State, we played Thursday, Sunday. When we would go away, we would leave on Wednesday. So we were missing 3 days of school. But Florida State was really good about that. They always brought a tutor on the road. Anyone who needed help with their schoolwork, there was always someone there to help. We had mandatory study hall hours, so we had to clock in for 8 hours a week to make sure that we were all doing our work when we were at Florida State and not on an away trip. But it was quite challenging because, again, you're trying to represent your school. Like, you don't want to fail because the women's soccer program is starting to lose games because maybe some people are ineligible because they're academics. So you're juggling 2 different things that are both very serious. And although academics seems personal to you, it's also kind of on the team as well because you're playing for a team. And if you're not eligible because you're lacking your academics, it's hurting the team. So it was a lot of pressure. And it wasn't just on the field, it was in academics as well.
Jess.
So I want to go back. Well, hey, I'm Jess. So I want to go back to the comment where you talked about how you got that direct message, the Instagram DM, saying how you were inspiration and you were really unaware if it was genuine or they were just saying that about your arm. So there was this viral video of you fist bumping like this little kid. And those moments like remind you of your work and like your inspiration. Like, how was that experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, that video definitely changed my life for sure. And I think that it did give me, yes, it gave me a lot more followers on Instagram, which seems kind of silly, but also it was more people that then could be aware of my story and then understand what it was like to have one arm, and maybe they could go and tell my story to someone else. So I feel like every single time I get a follower, it's not like great because I get more followers, it's because I now am excited that people are seeing my story, and it's just getting out there more. And I do like the conversations with people. Instead of just saying I'm an inspiration, I would love for somebody to ask me a question about my arm, or like, I feel like people think it's rude when they're like, oh, what happened to your arm? But actually I appreciate them asking that because then I can get my story out there and they can understand that I was born with one arm and why it happened and things like that. Whereas people just, I feel like sometimes are wanting just to say something because they're awkward and they don't know what else to say. So they're like, oh, you're an inspiration. But like, if I had a genuine conversation with every single person that said I was an inspiration, I think it would mean more to me because I think it would show that they're trying to actually get to know me as a person, and not just because they are a fan of mine and just want to make sure that they know that they're a fan of mine. I just want it to be genuine. But going on, it's a good question because like DMs and things like that, although I think social media is great. And we were talking about EA Sports and being in the video game and stuff like that. I've had some bad experiences with DMs and social media. So I do think it is incredible to be able to use my platform to show my arm and things like that. But I've also had some really bad DMs from that game that have come. People telling me that, like, honestly, they've been horrible. I don't even want to say some of them, but like, I'm slow, I'm ruining their team. Like, I need to quit soccer and find another job. I mean, and there was ones about killing myself and things like that because I'm slow on EA Sports game. So like, that sounds bad and it is, but when I get those DMs, it is sad that people are so worried about a video game that they're just completely not thinking about the person that they're DMing. I don't even know these people and they're telling me someone told me to go kill myself because I ruined one of their EA Sports games. So I think that social media is great, but I think there's a side of it that is horrible. And I think that people just need to understand that when they reach out to people, they might not think that they're ever going to see it, but a lot of my DMs I do see, because I like to reach back to people and show a genuine connection between me and my fans. But I think people need to understand that their words go a long way, and it could be great, but it also could be really, really horrific.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Yeah, of course.
So we're all sports cam majors, so some of us probably want to be in front of the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're also being a public figure, just like
Mhm.
what you're experiencing. So what, I guess, advice you can say to people who want to be in front of that camera and in front of a public figure, like being a public figure? Like, what would be advice you would give to them to get over like those rude comments or hate comments?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, like even when I was getting drafted early on, there was a fan, I'm not going to say his name, but there was a fan who put out a mock draft. And like, I don't know this person. I've never met him. I don't even know what he looks like. And he's putting out a mock draft. I remember being so upset because I was like not in the first round. And my dad's like, you don't even know who this is. It's a fan that probably has never played soccer before. So I think just like taking comments as they come and knowing that they could be genuine, yes, but they also could be so ingenuine, and they also could have no knowledge of soccer, and you're worried about what someone said when you don't even know them. So I think just kind of, it is hard sometimes because words hurt. And then on the flip side, if I get a DM about how amazing I played in the game, like that's exciting for me, but it also could be from the exact same fan that means nothing to me. If they're being rude, it's almost like I want to be like, oh, well, they don't mean anything to me. But if they're being nice, I'm like, oh, thanks, I appreciate that. But they could be the same kind of person. So I think just taking the comments as they come and just realizing that if they're not close to you, if they're not in your inner circle, if you don't know them personally, that you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. It's a good question.
I just had a question. You talked about how you were motivated and you wanted to join the women's national team. So, not regarding that, just your motivation. Like when you were younger, how did you like overcome all the stigmatism that came with not having another arm and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. I think the biggest thing that I can comment about that question is just I didn't want to make teams because I had one arm. I didn't want to be a story. So sometimes when I make teams out, I would almost question myself because I'm like, am I making it because I'm a good soccer player, or I'm making it because it looks good for that team to take someone with one arm? So I think that it was hard to balance that sometimes, and I think your self-worth kind of fluctuates, goes back and forth. Am I good enough? Am I just being on this team because of a story? And I think that was quite difficult growing up. But on the flip side, like I said, I feel like there's always a positive to any kind of negative. And my dad was like, well, at least at these tryouts, when these coaches don't know any of these kids, they're going to remember the girl with one arm because there's no one else out here with one arm. So it's a good thing sometimes. So again, you just have to take, like I kind of said with that question, you have to take things with a grain of salt. You do have to just back yourself and trust yourself and know that you are good enough to be where you're at. But I think as humans, we always doubt ourselves a little bit deep down and wonder why we're doing the things that we're doing, or why we got accepted to this major, or why I got to be on this team. Is it because I'm actually a good soccer player, or is it because I'm a story that is going to be told and then they get credit for taking someone with one arm? So it's hard sometimes to remember your self-worth, but I mean, that's what you did has gotten you to where you're at now. And I think sometimes we just need to back ourselves and know that we're good enough. Yeah.
Something I was curious about, tying back to the Nike cleats thing you guys mentioned earlier, is kind of the recovery industry in regards to both professional athletes and just regular consumers has kind of grown a lot in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know, Theragun has kind of been a very hot product in the last couple of years. As someone with a limb difference, have you noticed that like the products that are readily available to you are different, or is your recovery process different than your other teammates?
I would say recovery wise, no, it's all the same. I will say it would be cool. I do have boots as well, like recovery boots and things like that. And for someone with two hands, they wouldn't understand, but like it's really hard for me to zip the zipper up. So like I think it would be cool for companies like that to come out with things that maybe aren't as hard, because I'm also not flexible, so I can't even reach my toes. So like I'm hardly able to reach my toes. I definitely can't reach it with my left arm, so I'm having to do it with my right arm. So I think that when companies do come out with things like that, that's why I think I love Nike so much, because they're always thinking of ways of inclusion. They always are wanting everyone to feel included, and they're coming up with insane ways to make sure that happens. Whereas other companies, they just have never had to deal with that, and there's no exposure to that. So I think that that's why I feel kind of a responsibility to be like, I could reach out to them and be like, just to let you know, it would be really awesome if you didn't have a zipper, if you had some kind of like tie or like a flap that would work. I think that that's something that I can also become, you know, with some self-reflection, I could be better at, and I could kind of stand up for people with one arm and be like, actually, the zipper is really hard. It'd be cool if you came out with something different. And it's not just for me, it's for people down the road that maybe actually can't zip a zipper, because even trying to zip a zipper on my jacket is really difficult. And I had that conversation with Nike as well. I'm like, your zippers are hard sometimes for me, and it would be cool if you can come out with a jacket that's not, doesn't zip, it's some kind of other way, and they're on it immediately. They're like, oh, cool, we would love to come up with something like that. So I think it's also in my hands, but it's also in their hands to kind of make sure that athletes are feeling included in every part of their product.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
How do you feel, kind of like with other athletes being in your same situation? Like, I think Jim Abbott, who's a pitcher for the New York Yankees, and then Shaq Griffin, the Seahawks, and Bethany Hamilton, the surfer. Like, how does it feel to have inspirational athletes kind of come before you and be like, hey, we can do it and you can?
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, like I didn't have that growing up, so I never saw anyone that was different. I never saw anyone that was like me. And that was challenging because I'm like, well, if I have one arm, I don't look like any of these girls. Can I play soccer? Will they even accept me onto these teams because I look different? So I think seeing other athletes come before me and kind of showing everyone the ropes and being like, you can do whatever you want to do. You don't have to have two hands to compete in a sport. And I think that that's the good thing about soccer as well, is like, it is obviously a foot dominant sport. So the way that I chose soccer was probably because my arm. But it is cool to see these other athletes just be so successful in what they're doing, and still looking just like me. So it's awesome.
Jess.
So you mentioned when you did get drafted, your identity and trying to find like new places every time you got traded somewhere else. So also working in sports, if there's a job opportunity in another state, we also have to take that too. So what was your process and how did you adapt to those new environments?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like I said, going from Tallahassee, Florida to Seattle is a big difference. But I honestly, especially being a rookie, I remember finding, and it can happen in anything, like, so in your job, I remember finding the best possible person I could find on the team, the one I looked up to the most, and just trying to like cling to them a little bit and have them show me the ropes. And actually, this is why I did this, because the person that I chose in Seattle to kind of show me the ropes, her name's Bev Yanez. And so she was my teammate for 2 years, and she was an incredible human, like awesome soccer player. But at that time, I didn't care. I was just wanting to look up to someone that was just an awesome human. And she was so nice to the rookies, and because there's a lot of veterans out there that just don't give you the time of day when you're new. And I remember her just being so sweet, kind of showing me the ropes, kind of telling me about the environment on and off the field and things like that. So I learned a lot through her. But now she's actually my coach. So it's cool, like seeing the people that you look up to that are your teammates, and now finding those kind of people that are awesome in your sport or in your environment. And because I had such a good relationship with her, she's now my coach, and now I have such a good relationship with her, but it's very different. Like, I respect her as my coach now, not as my teammate. So I think just finding your people the best you can and as early as possible will give you the best chance to kind of survive in that environment, because they've been there, they know the ropes, and they'll help you as much as possible. So I think definitely clinging on to people that are just professional, but also just really good people as well. That's what I've found. I've had a lot of teammates that are awesome soccer players, but off the field, just not as much of what I aligned with. And so I just always wanted to find the best kind of people, the ones that treated everyone right, the ones that gave me a time of day when I was 21 years old, and a little rookie coming from Tallahassee, Florida. So I think just finding really good people around you that will help you out. It's a great question.
We have time for one more. Yeah. Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan. My question is, any part of your legacy as a soccer player, growing up or professional, are you most proud of? Any part of it? And is there any part of your life where you look back in awe of, like, oh wow, I really accomplished that, and what does it mean to you now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think getting my first cap for the national team is something that no one can ever take away from me. And I think that I just remember my parents being in the stands for my first cap, and I walked out of the tunnel and people are like chanting your name, they're chanting USA, and like to be able to play for a country, just like I almost forget how much of an honor it is to be able to represent a whole country. And so I think that was definitely a moment that I'm most proud of. And I think, again, probably another one is like when I was at Florida State, I was the first person in college soccer. There was another girl, but she wore prosthetic and stuff. So I was the first one that just didn't wear any prosthetic, and I only had my arm and things like that. So it was much more visible when I played. So kind of being the first one to do that, and then going into the league and being the first professional women's soccer player in the NWSL to have one arm or to have a disability like a limb difference. It's pretty cool. It's cool. Sometimes I forget about it because for so long I didn't want to be known as someone with one arm. I just want to be known as a soccer player. But now that I've grown over time and I've realized that I do have a responsibility, and it is cool that I was the first person to be able to actually share my story to show that you don't need two hands to play soccer. I think that's probably one of the coolest things. That's a great question.
All right, thank you all, and please give a huge thank you to Carson. So thank you all for being here. There should still be some pizza out there, I think, right? So go get pizza if you haven't had some already. It's around the corner. All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you guys.